Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have 3 historical Dogman, Sasquatch, Wildman, you call it what you want, attacks on human beings. Before we get into today's upload, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. All of those links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fanfiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that they just don't fit on this channel. Now, if that's anything that you're into, follow that link and give those stories a listen. You may just like what you hear. Last but not least, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1 and 2 are now available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. Written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. The links to those books are in the description as well. Now, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. Jackson County, Florida is blessed with an abundance of alleged sightings of the monster that some call Bigfoot. Reports of these creatures have come from virtually all ports of the county. In the swamps and remote parts around Paramore and Two Egg in eastern Jackson County. For example, many stories are told of the Two Egg stump jumper, a sort of mini Bigfoot that's often seen in headlights of cars at night or lurking in the darkness around rural homes. Similar sightings have been reported in the swamps along the Chipola River, particularly in the forks of the creek area between Malone and Camp Belton. Other reports have come from the swamps along the Apalachicola River and the vast cypress forests of Ochese Pond. It was in the last locality in 1884 that a party of searchers pulled off one of the few documented captures of a Bigfoot-like creature. That, in the parlance of those days, was called the Wild Man of the Woods. Sightings of the Wild Man were nothing new. In the 19th century South, Indians told early settlers of a strange man-like creature that roamed remote swamps and woods. Covered with hair and much taller than normal humans, the monster was considered dangerous, and most who encountered him would not approach him. Located between Grand Ridge and the Sneeds in the southwest corner of Jackson County, Ochese Pond was a focal point for early settlers. More than 3 miles long and nearly the distance wide, the Clearwater Pond fills a vast shallow basin. While there are some sections of open water, primarily along the southernmost reaches, most of the Ochese Pond is covered with a dense growth of cypress and other swamp trees. It is a strikingly beautiful place, but the swamp can easily feel a bit foreboding as well. The Wild Man traditionally favored such dense and swamp locations, but in 1883, local residents nevertheless were surprised when their neighbors began reporting encounters and sightings of one of the creatures. He seemed to live on berries and other edibles that grew wild in and around the pond and was often seen swimming or wading as he moved from island to island. He tried his best to stay away from humans, but his cries often shattered the nighttime stillness of the farms and homes nestled along the shores of the pond. As the number of sightings increased, so too did concerns about the safety of the local families. Residents of the pond area gathered and discussed the situation and finally decided that an effort should be launched to capture or drive off the monster. Men assembled with guns, boats, and horses, and a plan was devised by which they would converge on the creature's last reported location from various directions at once. Many of these men had served only 20 years before in the Confederate Army. They knew the pond well and had seen far scarier things in their lifetime than a man covered in hair. It did not take long for them to find their prey, and on August 18, 1884, startling news went out from Columbus, Georgia. News brought by the steamer Amos Hayes from the lower river is to the effect that a wild man captured in Ocheese Swamp near Chattahoochee and carried to Tallahassee did not belong to a Florida asylum, and that all inquiry proved unavailing to identify him. He had been swimming in Ocheese Lake from island to island, and when taken was entirely destitute of clothing, emaciated and covered with a phenomenal growth of hair. He could give no account of himself, and the theory is that he escaped from an asylum from some other state and spent his time in the woods living on berries and etc. Other reports followed, but the details were consistent. The captured wild man acted insane and was covered with a thick growth of hair and had lived deep in the swamps. The newspapers of the time, however, were silent on the eventful fate of the Ocheese Pond wild man, despite the fact that his body was covered in thick hair. He was human enough in appearance that his captors believed that he probably had escaped from an asylum. No asylum reported such an odd escapee, however, and his captors became even more baffled by the wild man. Just something I was thinking about when I read this initially was just back in November, a gentleman was savagely attacked at nighttime in a rural home area by an unknown animal. And since that attack, like I said when I covered it, there has been no more news offered up about this poor gentleman's death. And, so this is pointing to something. I mean, it's evident something had lived in Jackson. Are they still there? I think so. Today's second part of the upload, before I get into the early historic encounter, I just wanted to say something. There is something that is in the article that I completely disagree with. And if you listen, just listen to what I'm going to say quick. The word Sasquatch comes from a Salish Native American term, and it really, the word was dedicated towards a large, hairy, human-like creature. And so the word Sasquatch comes from the Washington, Oregon area. Just remember that when I read the article, please. Exactly what was the Arkansas wild man? A real creature or an elaborate hoax? The truth may never be known. Many believers that stories of Bigfoot, a gigantic, hairy man-like creature with huge feet, originated in the Pacific Northwest. This is not precisely correct. Early settlers of the South reported encounters with strange Sasquatch-like monsters long before the first recorded sightings in Washington and Oregon. As they pushed their settlements deep into the woods and their hunts even deeper, the early frontier people of the South often ran up against mysteries that defied all explanation. One of the most bizarre involved a series of events surrounding a creature called the Wild Man by newspapers in the 1840s. The earliest known recorded sighting took place in February and March of 1846 in the Crowley Ridge area of eastern Arkansas. Stories about the creature's appearance were carried in the newspaper across the nation, with the Baltimore Sun reporting on March 13, 1846, that his track measured 22 inches, his toes are as long as the common man's finger, and in height and make he is double the usual size. Other reports followed, with a second surge of news coverage taking place in 1851. The New Hampshire Patriot and State Gazette reported on May 29th of that year that an expedition was about to leave Memphis to hunt for the wild man. The monster was said to be of gigantic size and covered with hair. That same newspaper followed with a page 1 account on June 5th, quoting the Memphis Inquirer as its source for a report that a wild man had been seen chasing a herd of cattle. He was of gigantic stature, the body being covered with hair, and the head with long locks that fairly enveloped his neck and shoulders. The wild man, after looking at them deliberately for a short time, turned and ran away with great speed, leaping from 12 to 14 feet at a time. The Inquirer account noted that the monster had been seen in St. Francis, Greene, and Poinsett counties for 17 years, a statement that indicates that now lost reports may have been made as early as 1834. Colonel David C. Cross and Dr. Sullivan of Memphis were said to be organizing an expedition to search for a creature. This may have been the first Bigfoot hunt in American history. No written details of the result of their search have been found yet, but certainly could exist. Another round of accounts appeared in the nation's newspaper in 1856. On January 3rd of that year, and Pittsfield Sun reported, a wild man 7 feet high is stated to be roaming through the great Mississippi bottom in Arkansas. Numerous travelers and hunters have asserted that they have seen him, but none have been able to get near enough to give particulars concerning the strange being. Not all accounts, however, were from the swamps of eastern Arkansas. A fairly bizarre report appeared in May of 1856 reporting a sighting in April on the upper Red River and noting that the creature had also been seen in northern Louisiana. According to this version, which appeared in the Wisconsin Patriot on May 10th, 1856, the wild man was spotted. Breaking the ice of a frozen lake, he was covered with hair of brownish cast and was described as being very well musculared. A party of men from Louisiana had gone into the wilderness on horseback to find the creature and decided to try to capture it. One man from this group had gone ahead of his comrades and decided to try to take the monster on his own. This was a bad idea. So soon as the wild man saw the horse and rider, he rushed frantically toward them, and in an instant dragged the hunter to the ground and tore him in a most dreadful manner, scratching out one of his eyes and injuring the other, so much that his comrades despair of recovery of his sight, and biting large pieces out of his shoulder and various parts of his body. And perhaps the most bizarre part of the story, the wild man supposedly made off with the injured man's horse. The hunter's friends set off in pursuit, joined by a party of Choctaw Indians that happened to be in the area. The chase led into the Ouachita Mountains, then covered in snow from a particularly brutal winter, where the pursuers failed to capture the elusive prey. Stories of the gigantic, hair-covered, man-like creature are told in Arkansas to this day, notably in the Ouachita and Ozark Mountains, and in the swamps of the Mississippi and Red River. The famed Boggy Creek monster is just one modern manifestation. Today's third historical sighting of Sasquatch, Dogman, or Wild Man, you call it. Did a Bigfoot really attack a party of men in the Okefenokee swamp in 1892? Or was it a tall tale? The answer to those questions may never be known, but the story is one of many that add to the mystery of the swamp. The tale originated near the south end of the Ware County, where the line that divides Georgia from Florida passes through the Okefenokee. In 1892, the first settlers were just pushing into the fringes of the swamp, surrounded by a stunning beauty of the swamp. they quickly picked up on an Indian legend that held of mystery race of people lived on the island deep in the wilderness. So far as known, this legend appeared in print in 1806 in Jedediah Morris's book, Geography Made Easy. In his section on Georgia, Morris repeated a legend that a group of Indian hunters had gone into the swamp and become lost. When they were in desperate condition, a party of most beautiful women they had ever seen came to their rescue. They, being lost in a swamp and bog, and on the point of perishing, were unexpectedly revived by a company of beautiful women, whom they called daughters of the sun, who kindly gave them such provisions as they had with them, consisting of fruit and corn cakes. The tale, as repeated by Morris, continued, the women warning the hunters to flee as fast as possible to their own country, because their husbands were fierce men and cruel to strangers. These men of the swamp were said by the Creek Indians to be of gigantic stature and both cruel and warlike. The winter of 1828 and 29 was extremely dry, and two men living on the edges of the swamp decided to explore as deep into it as they could. Accompanied by a boy, they went into the Okefenokee, and over a course of 2 weeks, continued to penetrate deeper and deeper into it. As they explored the very heart of the swamp, they made a startling discovery of gigantic footprints. The length of the foot was 18, and the breadth 9 inches. The monster, from every appearance, must have moved forward in ease or hesitating gait, his stride from heel to toe being a trifle over 6 feet. Milledgeville, Georgia Statesman, January 1829, republished by the Connecticut Sentinel, February 9, 1829. The men, as newspapers of the time noted, had seen enough, ending their expedition, and retreated out of the swamp. They relayed to their friends and neighbors what they had seen. The story excited the curiosity of a party of hunters who lived just across the Florida line. 9 in number, they went into the swamp to find a mysterious giant. They were guided by one of the members of the original party. Following for some days the direction of their guide, they came to the length upon first track, some vestige of which were still remaining. Pursuing these traces several days longer, they came to a halt on a little eminence, and determined to pitch their camp and refresh themselves for the day. The expedition was described in detail in the newspaper reports published in February 1829. Those accounts indicated that as hunters were discharging their guns to reload them with fresh powder for the night, a wild animal charged their camp. The next minute he was in full view, advancing upon them with terrible look and ferocious mien. Our little band instinctively gathered close in a body and presented their rifles. The huge being, nothing daunted, bounded onto the victims, and in the same instant received the contents of 7 rifles. The fight, however, did not end there. He did not fall alone, nor until he had galled his wrath with the death of 5 of them, which he effected by wrangling the head from the body. Writhing and exhausted, at the length he fell, with his hapless prey beneath his grasp. As the creature lay dying on the ground, writhing and sometimes roaring, the men who survived the attack gathered around it to make a closer inspection. The creature was found to measure 13 feet from head to toe, and his girth and volume of just proportions. Immediately fearful that the dying monster's cries might attract others of its kind, the hunters fled the swamp. The men who died in battle with the creature were left lying where they had fallen. It is a remarkable story, but could it be true? The honest answer is no one knows. The newspaper correspondent who reported it wrote that people living in Ware County on the margins of the Okefenokee swamp clearly believed it. Either way, the story of 1829 attack was one of the earliest written accounts of the creature we now know as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Sightings of some kind of large creature in a swamp and discoveries of large footprints continue to be reported from this area to this day. Alright guys, a couple of historic sightings and attacks. I find them interesting that, unlike today, at least the media was, we can't even call them media, but I will. The media back in the 1800s, early 1900s were at least somewhat friggin' honest. Calling it as they saw it, a hairy friggin' beast. And not pawning it off as wild dogs or mountain lions or I don't even know what. But, yeah. Pretty interesting there. I made a comment earlier in the second one where I said the Sasquatch name is Salish Indian. And it is. It's spelled Sesquuec. And a good friend of mine is Salish Indian. And ironically enough, their totem is not, or his tribe's totem is not the Sasquatch or the wood spirit, but a thunderbird. I just found that rather interesting. I might have to call him up a little later today and talk to him about that. Who knows? Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed these encounters as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. Damn, my throat is killing me today. Anyway, I'm going to suck down some tea and hopefully get a decent night's sleep tonight. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.